The Lusiads is an epic poem written by Luís de Camões. Portuguese is very similar to Spanish, but there are some differences. So we have the nasalization with the O, and the last S is pronounced as a sh, Camões. So since its publishing in 1572, the Lusiads has been considered as Portugal's national epic. So the importance of the story is that somehow it seems to have defined Portugal's identity as a nation with the themes of us versus other, right? Us versus them, the representations of the other. Those kinds of questions are always tied to the imagining of the nation, like how a nation comes to imagine itself. And so we're seeing that everywhere in this particular text. And finally, this particular epic poem refers to events that took place nearly a century before its publishing. This text is written in 1572, but it's really calling back and referring to the great feats of exploration and voyage being done a century before, specifically Vasco da Gama's discovery of a sea route to India in 1497. I don't know about y'all, but as somebody who's been through the American educational system, like the high school, I never really got taught geography. I kind of had to teach myself geography. And so I don't know if that's the case for any of y'all, but just in case it is, I'm just going to throw up some maps. So we have been talking about the Reconquista for the past couple of weeks. So now we're talking about Portugal, right? How is Portugal connected with the Reconquista? So Portugal is came about as a kingdom, a nation, because it's one of the Christian northern kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula that expanded southward against the Spanish Muslim kingdoms of Al-Andalus. If you look at earlier maps during the Reconquista, which we did in our previous sessions, you could kind of see, like, as the Christian northern kingdoms were pushing down south, you had a multiple sort of collection of kingdoms in the north. You had Castile, right, the kingdom of Castile. You had Aragon. You had Leon. But you had also a nobleman called Afonso, the Count of Porto, right? So Porto is a city like in current day Portugal. So he is, he basically goes ahead and establishes his own kingdom. So you can kind of see Portugal comes from Porto. And so it's founded as an independent kingdom by King Afonso I, the Count of Portugal, in 1129 CE. And so Portugal completes its Reconquista much earlier than Spain. And so it finishes its Reconquista, it expels the Spanish Muslims in 1249 CE. So 1492 is the date when Spain completes its Reconquista and establishes its half of the Iberian Peninsula as a Christian kingdom. But Portugal completes that process a lot earlier. In case any of y'all are soccer fans, right? You probably know of Cristiano Ronaldo, and so he's Portuguese, right? He's from Portugal. The Lusiads is important because it's the literary representation of the conquest and exploration that established the first global maritime empire, Portugal. So this is a sea shift, right, in how the world economic and political system was organized. So the Portuguese Empire showed European kingdoms that circumventing the land-based Silk Road global system was possible. We tend to think that globalization is a new thing. It's only something that has happened in the 20th century, and that is not true. The earlier kind of great system of globalization was called the Silk Road, and the system of trade and maritime exchange connecting China to India, to the Middle East, to Europe. And so that was the earlier form of globalization. So what Portugal does, right, by creating a maritime route from Western Europe to India, is to lay the foundations of a new system of globalization, the Atlantic system. So the Portuguese Empire is the predecessor and model for the transatlantic empires of Spain, England, France, Netherlands, and Russia. So once again, it is a feat that let Western Europe kind of know that, oh, it is possible to circumvent this system of trade and globalization and to lay the foundations for a new one. The text itself is actually written in a period of political decline and fragmentation for Portugal. So Portugal's imperial overreach depletes the kingdom, right, by the 1580s. And the Portuguese king Sebastian I, right, who's the king when Camões is writing the text, dies while fighting a crusade in Morocco in the Battle of Alcácer el-Kabir in 1578. And Portugal is annexed by Spain in 1580, and it's part of Spain until round about 1640 when it basically, pushes Spain out and reestablishes itself as an independent kingdom. So let's go back and look at some maps, right? So if you look at the map on the left, you can see the Silk Road, this earlier system of globalization. So these you can see this kind of network, this web of routes connecting Asia to the Middle East, to India, to Western Europe. So it's you did have maritime routes that those are in blue, but it mostly follows the geography of the land, right? So it's mostly a land-based system, and the sea routes are kind of right, just kind of conforming to the way the land is laid out. And here's, of course, Spain and Portugal in the corner. And so Western Europe is a part of the Silk Road, but you can see that it's on the outskirts. It's on the fringes. It's not part of the center. The center, you can see where the roads are intersecting, right? The center is very much in the Middle East. So the Middle East is the hub that connects the West to the East in this system of globalization. And so what Portugal does, if you look at the map on the right-hand side, this is right, I'm blowing up the Iberian Peninsula here. So again, da Gama, like Bartholomew Diaz, and then later da Gama, sailing around Africa, right? Circumventing this whole land-based system and arriving to India by sea. I'm just going to go ahead and show you a map of the Portuguese Empire as well. This kind of combines the period that we're looking at from the Lusiads with the period that's a little later, right? Like the scramble for Africa, the 18th century period of imperialism. So this is showing more territory than that Portugal had than it actually did at the time Camões is writing, but it's still helpful. So you have Portugal over here. So at the time Camões is writing, half of Brazil was part of the Portuguese Empire. So they really didn't have these areas, right? But they had cities. Like you guys read about the Feitoria system. They had these trading coastal cities, settlements called Feitorias. And so you had these Feitorias established, in Guinea, right? And then Mombasa as well. And then, of course, in the south of India. So you had Cochin, Goa, and then Calicut, right? That's all in the southern tip of India over here. So one thing also that it's important to mention when we're talking about the Portuguese Empire is that Portugal is the first European power that establishes the European transatlantic slave trade. The Portuguese captured the first Atlantic slaves between 1441 and 1444. The earlier slaves in this transatlantic slaving system were first Muslim Berbers of the Canary Islands that Portuguese colonizes, and then later when Portugal establishes their fetorias in West Africa and Ghana, then they are the ones that first established a system of enslaving sub-Saharan Africans and taking them to Spain and then selling them in the slave markets in Seville. And from Spain, they used to be taken to the Spanish colonies in the Americas. And so in 1526, Portuguese mariners carried the first shiploads of African slaves to Brazil and the Americas, establishing the triangular transatlantic slave trade. And Portuguese really is the kind of the power that dominates the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, until Britain takes it over in 1562. And I have some representations that above you have a woodcut. Obviously, you couldn't do it without co-opting local kings. And so this looks like a native ruler here in Africa. And then you have of course, scenes of people being brought in slavery and, being prepared to be shipped to Spain. And then in the very bottom, if you guys have seen materials about the slave trade, the Elmina Castle is really one of those infamous places that always pops up. It's a fortress that was built during the Portuguese rule in Ghana on the west coast of Africa, and they built this huge fortress that became the slave depot of West Africa. So, when you read Orinoco and those later accounts, like this is where the slaves used to be kept in the dungeons, and this is where the trading deals, like the commercial deals were struck. And it's really a horrible, horrible place. It's featured in a lot of documentaries, and it was taken over by the British when they took control of the slave trade from Portugal. So this is one of those visible monuments that are left from that period. This came up in your RJs too when we're doing the cantigas, right? So how do we really resolve you know, Christianity and Christian beliefs with the system of colonialism that gets established, right, with the Atlantic system and its beginnings in Iberia during the Reconquista. So yeah, like how is Christianity compatible with empire and colonialism, right? So, I'm thinking, I mean, when we look at the New Testament, we're reading Matthew 5:7, be merciful and you shall know mercy. We're reading Micah 6.8, which is, the Lord commands you, I'm paraphrasing here, but the Lord commands you to good and to kindness and to mercy, right? There's this like message um of mercy, of kindness, of charity, of this kind of brotherly love, right? That is a key part of the New Testament's message. And then we're reading again literature written by um, authors who do again seem to have this very intense religious zeal, but where does the colonialism come in? How can the two fit together? So this is what I want to explain to y'all, and just we can kind of talk about it more. We have to know history because if we don't learn history, we tend to repeat it, right? So this history of epicness, of determination, of exploration coincides with this history of pain and colonization, right? And so we need to know this so that we don't repeat the past as well. We have this kind of in these texts, there's this paradox that we have to grapple with of this universalism of mercy and New Testament messages with the othering and racialization of non-Christians and non-Europeans, right? How do the two go together? So the answer is actually Rome. Medieval European kingdoms actually inherited the political models of the Roman Empire, which presumed an inherent Roman right to world conquest. The Roman Empire lasted for 1,000 years. You have Emperor Constantine convert to Christianity in 312 CE. But even after he converts to Christianity and the Roman Empire becomes ostensibly Christian, those older models of Roman thinking are a part of the culture, right? They're very much a part of, the political, economic, cultural landscape of Western Europe. So we have to know about this to understand this conception of empire and where it's coming from. In the Roman Empire, right, there's this idea of the Imperium Romanum, which combines the idea of the state and extraterritorial dominion over diverse lands and people. And it goes without saying that, when you're conquering, you're not really concerned about people's consent. And so we can think back to Virgil's great epic poem, the Aeneid, the great Roman poem, right? Which Camões based the Lusiads off of, where you have a line that says, Remember, Roman, it is for you to rule the nations with your power. That will be your skill, to crown peace with law, to spare the conquered and subdue the proud. Needless to say, if you're one of the proud who doesn't want to be part of the Imperium Romanum, tough luck, right? You're gonna probably suffer the consequences as, Carthage, like, or one of those older, right, classical cities did. Um, so again, you have Bartolus in Western Europe, in medieval Western Europe, again, thinking back to these writings by Roman writers like Cicero, Sallust, Pliny, Tacitus. Like these are the writers that intellectuals in Western Europe are again thinking about and citing and quoting. And so Rome again becomes part of the intellectual inheritance of the culture. And so Bartolus writes, the Roman emperor is the lord and monarch of the world, dominium et monarchiae totius orbis. And again, you guys have heard of that famous quote, all roads lead to Rome, right? So in Rome, ancient Rome, you had this idea of Rome as the world. And the parts of the world that didn't happen to be Roman were just, going to be Roman at some point. So the idea of Rome as an Imperium Romanum that has this right to conquest, the idea of Rome as a world empire, these are those core ideas that are carrying over from Roman culture, that the Western European writers, right, in the medieval time period are citing, are quoting. The inheritance of Rome comes with the appreciation of classical learning. And so to come back to the Lusiads and how does the kind of Christian um, sentiments that you have kind of mixed with the pagan gods and goddesses, think about that. Think about what this shows about the culture of, the inheritance of classical learning and the inheritance of the Roman world, right? That comes with classical learning and classical mythology. Along, how does that kind of right mixing and interacting with the Christian texts in the medieval period? So that's something that we have to kind of pay attention to when we're reading the Lusiads. I'm going to cite Anthony Pagden, who's an incredible scholar about transatlantic empires, and his book Lords of All the Worlds: Ideologies of Empire in Spain, Britain, and France. He writes, it was above all Rome, which provided the ideologues of the colonial systems of Spain, Britain, and France with the languages and political models they required. For the Imperium Romanum has always had a unique place in the political imagination of Western Europe. Not only was it believed to have been the largest and most powerful political community on earth, it all had also been endowed with a succession of writers with a distinct, sometimes divinely inspired purpose, right? So the idea that Rome as the world empire, Rome as having the right to world conquest, there's something divine about this, right? So that is part of the Roman culture.